The amber light of dusk crept through the saloon windows as Flora Caldwell clutched the telegram, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped the small piece of paper containing news that would forever alter her life. The words blurred before her eyes: her husband of 2 years, Henry, killed in a stagecoach robbery 50 miles north of Redemption Creek. Flora stood frozen amidst the noise and bustle of the Golden Spur Saloon, a widow at 26 in a town where women had few paths to survival. It was 1875 in the Arizona Territory, and Flora had come west with dreams that now lay shattered like the whiskey glass that had just slipped from her fingers, crashing to the floorboards. "Miss, are you all right?" A deep voice cut through her fog of grief. Flora looked up to see a man she'd never met, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a clear mountain lake. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but his gaze was steady and concerned. "I'm fine," she lied, folding the telegram and tucking it into her apron pocket. The stranger looked unconvinced. "Name's Kieran Ellison," he said, removing his hat and revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. "I don't mean to intrude, madam, but you look like you've just seen a ghost." Flora attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Not a ghost, Mr. Ellison. Just becoming one, perhaps." She stooped to pick up the shards of broken glass, grateful for something to do with her hands. Kieran knelt beside her. "Let me help you with that." His fingers, calloused but surprisingly gentle, gathered the larger pieces. "Thank you, but I can manage," Flora said, aware of the curious glances from the saloon's other patrons. As the establishment's only female employee who wasn't working upstairs, she attracted enough attention without causing scenes. "I insist," Kieran said, helping her to her feet. "And I'd be honored to buy you a drink. Looks like you could use one." 3 months later, Flora stood behind the bar of the Golden Spur, wiping glasses with a cloth worn thin from years of use. She'd been working there since Henry's death, serving drinks and occasionally singing when the owner, Walter Bailey, insisted. The pay was barely enough to keep her small room at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, but it was honest work, unlike what the girls upstairs provided. The saloon doors swung open, and Kieran Ellison walked in, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He'd stayed in town after their first meeting, taking work at the Broken Arrow Ranch outside town. Each evening, he would come to the saloon, order one whiskey, and talk with Flora while she worked. Their friendship had grown steadily, his quiet strength becoming something she relied upon without meaning to. "Evening, Miss Flora," he said, settling onto his usual stool. "How are the fine citizens of Redemption Creek treating you today?" She offered him a genuine smile, something she found herself doing more often in his presence. "Well enough. Mr. Bailey let me take a break earlier to visit the Mercantile." Kieran nodded appreciatively. "That's mighty generous of him." He leaned forward slightly. "I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you to the town social this Saturday. I hear they're having music and dancing." Flora's hands stilled on the glass she was polishing. "I don't know if that's proper, Mr. Ellison. I'm still in mourning." His blue eyes held no judgment, only understanding. "There's no set time for grief, Miss Flora, but there is a time for living again." Before she could respond, Walter Bailey's voice boomed from across the room. "Flora, get over here and help with these orders." "I should go," she said apologetically. Kieran nodded. "Think about Saturday," he said, before draining his glass and heading to a table where some of the other ranch hands were playing cards. Later that night, Flora walked home under a canopy of stars, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the cool desert evening. Footsteps sounded behind her, and she quickened her pace, one hand slipping into her pocket where she kept a small knife. "Miss Flora, wait." Kieran called, jogging to catch up with her. Relief flooded through her. "Mr. Ellison, you startled me. Forgive me," he said. "I wanted to make sure you got home safely." They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sounds their footsteps and the distant howl of a coyote. "I've been thinking," Kieran said finally, "about what brings a woman like you to a place like this." Flora's laugh was hollow. "The same thing that brings most people to the territory dreams of a better life." She paused. "Henry and I came west because the doctor back home said the dry air might help my constitution." "Your health," she hesitated, then decided honesty was simpler than evasion. "We'd been trying to have a child for 3 years with no success. The doctor suggested a change might help." They reached Mrs. Hollister's boarding house and Flora turned to face him. "Thank you for walking me home, Mr. Ellison." "Kieran," he corrected gently. "After 3 months of conversations, I think we've earned first-name terms, don't you?" She smiled in the moonlight. "Kieran, then." "Good night." "About Saturday," he said as she reached for the door. "I'd still be honored if you'd accompany me." Flora paused, hand on the doorknob. "I'll think about it," she promised. Saturday evening arrived with a painted sunset that turned the rugged landscape into something from a painter's dream. Flora stood before the small, cracked mirror in her room, pinning her auburn hair into a simple but elegant style. She decided to accept Kieran's invitation, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Perhaps it was loneliness, or perhaps it was his steady, reliable presence that made her feel safe for the first time since Henry's death. She wore her best dress, dark blue calico with small white flowers embroidered along the collar. It wasn't fashionable by Eastern standards, but it was clean and well-mended. A knock at the door announced Kieran's arrival. Mrs. Hollister showed him into the small parlor where he waited, hat in hand, looking surprisingly dapper in a clean shirt and vest. "You look beautiful," he said when Flora entered the room. She felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." The town social was held in the schoolhouse, which had been transformed with paper lanterns and wildflowers. Nearly everyone in Redemption Creek had turned out, from ranchers to shopkeepers to the preacher and his wife. As they entered, Flora felt eyes upon her, some curious, some disapproving. She hadn't shown her face much in town since Henry's death, except at the saloon where she worked. "Don't mind them," Kieran whispered, offering his arm. "They're just not used to seeing someone as pretty as you." The evening progressed pleasantly, with fiddle music and dancing. Kieran proved to be a capable dancer, leading Flora through several reels and a waltz. His hand at her waist was respectful, his steps confident. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for some fresh air. The night was cool, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. "I'm glad you came," Kieran said softly. "So am I," Flora admitted. "It's been a long time since I've enjoyed myself." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Flora, I want to be honest with you. I've come to care for you a great deal in these past months." Her heart quickened. "Kieran, let me finish, please." He took her hands in his. "I know you're still grieving, and I respect that. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just wanted you to know that whenever you are ready, I'll be here." Flora felt tears prick at her eyes. "You deserve more than I can offer, Kieran. I'm damaged goods." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself. "I can't have children. The doctors confirmed it before we left Illinois. That's why we came west." Henry thought a fresh start might change things somehow, but it doesn't work that way. Kieran was quiet for a long moment. "Is that why you think you're not worthy of happiness? Because you can't bear children?" When she didn't answer, he stepped closer. "Flora, a woman's worth isn't measured by her ability to conceive. You're kind, strong, and braver than most men I know. Any man would be lucky to have you by his side, children or no. The music inside struck up again, a slow, sweet melody floating through the open windows. May I have this dance? Kieran asked, extending his hand. Flora hesitated, then nodded, allowing him to lead her back inside. As spring turned to summer, Flora found herself spending more time in Kieran's company. They would walk together after her shifts at the saloon, or he would escort her to church on Sundays. Occasionally, they would ride out to the creek just outside of town, where they would sit and talk for hours. Flora learned that Kieran had come west after the war, unable to settle back into his former life in Pennsylvania. He'd worked as a ranch hand, a miner, and briefly as a lawman before finding his way to Redemption Creek. I never felt at home anywhere until I came here, he confessed one afternoon as they sat by the creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. And what makes this place different? Flora asked, trailing her fingers through the cool water. Kieran looked at her, his expression open and honest. You know why? She blushed and looked away. Despite their growing closeness, Flora kept a part of herself distant, fearful of the pain that loving again might bring. One hot July afternoon, Flora was working at the saloon when a commotion erupted outside. The sound of gunfire sent everyone diving for cover. Flora crouched behind the bar, heart pounding as more shots rang out. The doors burst open and two men dragged a third inside. With horror, Flora recognized Kieran, blood soaking through his shirt. "Help him," one of the men shouted. "He took a bullet meant for James." They laid Kieran on a table as Flora rushed forward. "Get the doctor," she ordered, pressing her apron against the wound in his shoulder. Kieran's face was pale, his breathing labored. "Flora," he whispered, reaching for her hand. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she assured him, tears blurring her vision. "Don't talk. Save your strength." The town doctor arrived minutes later, examining the wound with practiced efficiency. "Bullet went clean through," he announced. "He's lucky. No vital organs hit, but he's lost a lot of blood." "Will he live?" Flora asked, her voice trembling. The doctor nodded. "With proper care. He needs to be moved somewhere clean and quiet." "My boarding house," Flora said immediately. "Mrs. Hollister will allow it." With the help of several men, they carried Kieran to Flora's small room at the boarding house. Mrs. Hollister, a widow herself who had taken a liking to Flora, didn't object, though she did insist on leaving the door open for propriety's sake. For 3 days, Flora barely left Kieran's side, bathing his fevered brow with cool cloths, changing his bandages, and spooning broth between his cracked lips when he was conscious enough to swallow. On the 4th day, his fever broke. Flora had fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed, and she woke to find him watching her, his blue eyes clear for the first time since the shooting. "You saved my life," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. Flora shook her head. "The doctor saved your life. I just helped." Kieran reached for her hand. "You've been here the whole time, haven't you?" She nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her rumpled appearance and the dark circles under her eyes. "Why?" he asked simply. Flora looked down at their joined hands. "Because I couldn't bear to lose you too," she admitted in a whisper. Kieran's recovery was slow but steady. By August, he was able to move back to the bunkhouse at the ranch, though he couldn't yet resume his full duties. Flora continued to visit him, bringing home cooked meals and books to keep him occupied during his convalescence. On a particularly beautiful evening in late August, Kieran suggested they ride out to watch the sunset from the ridge overlooking the valley. Though his arm was still in a sling, he managed the reins of his horse deftly with one hand. They sat together on a blanket, watching as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I've been doing a lot of thinking while I've been laid up," Kieran said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. That sounds dangerous, Flora teased. Though her heart had begun to race at his serious tone, he smiled. Maybe so, but I've come to a decision. He turned to face her fully. Flora, these past months have been the happiest of my life, despite taking a bullet. She couldn't help but laugh at that, though her eyes were growing damp. I love you, he continued, his voice low and sincere. I think I've loved you since that first night in the saloon, when you were trying so hard to be brave even though your world had just fallen apart. Flora's breath caught. Kieran, I want to marry you, he said, taking her hand in his good one. I want to build a life with you right here in Redemption Creek. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But I told you I can't have children. You deserve a whole woman, someone who can give you a family. Kieran's expression grew serious. You are whole, Flora, perfect just as you are. And as for a family, he squeezed her hand. There are more ways to make a family than just bearing children. What do you mean? There are children who need homes, orphans from the war, from disease, from accidents. We could give them love, a safe place to grow, if you're willing. Flora stared at him, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his eyes. You would want that, to raise children that aren't your own by blood. They would be mine, ours in all the ways that matter, he said firmly. Love makes a family, Flora, not blood. She threw her arms around him, mindful of his injured shoulder. Yes, she whispered against his neck. Yes, I'll marry you. The wedding was a simple affair held in the small church on the edge of town. Flora wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Hollister had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair. Kieran stood tall and proud, his injured arm out of the sling but still held carefully at his side. The entire town turned out for the celebration, curious to see the saloon girl marrying the ranch hand who had taken a bullet to save another man's life. Whatever whispers might have circulated about the propriety of their courtship were silenced by the obvious love between them. After the ceremony, they moved into a small cabin that Kieran had been secretly repairing on a plot of land just outside town. It wasn't fancy, 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and a porch with a view of the distant mountains, but to Flora, it was a palace. Welcome home, Mrs. Ellison, Kieran said, carrying her across the threshold despite his still healing shoulder. Flora looked around at the simple furnishings, a bed with a patchwork quilt, a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and felt a surge of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. It's perfect, she whispered, kissing him softly. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Kieran returned to work at the ranch while Flora took in sewing and occasionally helped at the general store. Their evenings were spent together, talking about their days, reading aloud from books, or simply sitting on their porch watching the sunset. In November, just as the first chill of winter was settling over the territory, Kieran returned home with news. The stagecoach brought mail today, he said, removing his hat and hanging it by the door. There's word from the orphanage in Tucson. They have 2 children who need placement siblings, a boy of 7 and a girl of 4. Flora's heart leaped. Brothers and sisters should stay together. That's what I thought too, Kieran said, watching her carefully. Are we ready for this? Flora thought of the small second room they had prepared, the 2 narrow beds, the wooden toys Kieran had carved, the storybooks she had collected. Yes, she said firmly. We're ready. 2 weeks later, they made the journey to Tucson. The orphanage was a stark, cheerless place run by well-meaning but overworked nuns. Sister Agnes led them to a small courtyard where children played. There they are, she said, pointing to a corner where a small boy sat protectively beside an even smaller girl. Thomas and Mary Wilkins. Their parents died of fever 6 months ago. They've been here ever since. The children looked up as Flora and Kieran approached. The boy's eyes were wary, his arm instinctively moving in front of his sister. Flora knelt down to their level. "Hello," she said gently. "My name is Flora and this is my husband, Kieran. We've come a long way to meet you." The little girl peered around her brother. "Why?" she asked in a tiny voice. "Because we have a home with empty beds and quiet that needs filling with laughter," Kieran said, crouching beside Flora. The boy, Thomas, studied them suspiciously. "Will we be separated?" "No," Flora said firmly. "Brothers and sisters belong together." They spent the afternoon getting acquainted, playing simple games and answering the children's hesitant questions. By the end of the day, Mary had climbed into Flora's lap, and Thomas was showing Kieran a small wooden horse he treasured. "What do you think?" Sister Agnes asked as the children were taken to dinner. "They're good children, but they've known loss." Flora and Kieran exchanged a look of perfect understanding. "So have we," Flora said. "Perhaps that's why we belong together." The next morning they began the journey home, the children's few possessions packed in a single small trunk. The stagecoach ride was long, but Flora delighted in showing the children the changing landscape, pointing out cacti, distant mountains, and the occasional wildlife. Thomas remained watchful, protective of his sister but gradually warming to Kieran's steady kindness. Mary, less reserved by nature, had already begun calling Flora Miss Flora and asking endless questions about their new home. "Will we have chores?" Thomas asked suddenly as they neared Redemption Creek. Kieran nodded. "Everyone in a household has responsibilities, but they'll be fair, and there'll be time for learning and play too." The boy seemed satisfied with this answer. "Our pa believed in hard work," he said seriously. "He taught me to feed the chickens and gather eggs." "We don't have chickens yet," Kieran said thoughtfully, "but perhaps we should get some. Would you like to help me build a coop?" Thomas's eyes widened with interest. "I could do that." When they finally arrived at the cabin, the children stood uncertainly on the porch, taking in their new surroundings. "Welcome home," Flora said, opening the door. Inside, she had prepared for their arrival fresh bread cooling on the table, the children's beds made up with colorful quilts, and a wooden box filled with toys waiting in the corner of their room. Mary gasped with delight at the doll lying on her bed, while Thomas ran his hand reverently over the quilt on his. "Is this really all for us?" he asked, his voice small with disbelief. "It really is," Kieran assured him. "And tomorrow, we'll show you the creek and the hills and all the places you can explore." That night, after the children were tucked into their new beds, Flora and Kieran sat by the fireplace, hands intertwined. "Are you happy?" Kieran asked softly. Flora looked toward the children's room, where soft, even breathing indicated they had finally succumbed to sleep. "More than I ever thought possible," she whispered. "The days turned into weeks and weeks into months." The children's presence transformed the small cabin, filling it with noise and energy and occasional chaos. There were difficult moments, nightmares, tears for parents long gone, adjustments to new rules and expectations, but there was joy too, in abundance. Thomas took to ranch life enthusiastically, following Kieran around whenever possible and soaking up knowledge about horses, cattle, and the land. Mary became Flora's shadow, learning to sew and cook and telling elaborate stories to her doll. By spring, they had settled into a family rhythm as natural as if they had always been together. One evening in April, Flora sat on the porch, watching as Kieran taught Thomas to throw a lasso in the yard. Mary was curled beside her on the bench, drowsy after a day spent helping to plant a vegetable garden. "Miss Flora," Mary murmured, "are you my mama now?" Flora's heart swelled. "I can be if you'd like me to be." The little girl nodded solemnly. "I think my first mama would like you." She was pretty too, and she sang songs. "What kind of songs?" Flora asked, stroking the child's hair. "Sleepy songs," Mary said, her eyelids drooping. "Will you sing me one?" Flora began to hum softly, a lullaby her own mother had sung to her many years ago. As the melody floated on the evening air, she caught Kieran's eye across the yard. He smiled at her, love evident in his expression. In that moment, Flora understood with perfect clarity what Kieran had meant on that ridge the previous summer. She couldn't birth children from her body, but she had birthed something equally precious: hope, love, a family built from broken pieces made whole again. The following Sunday, the family attended church as usual. After the service, as they were greeting neighbors, the preacher approached them. "Mr. and Mrs. Ellison," he said warmly, "I've been meaning to speak with you. There's a matter in which you might be able to help." "Of course, preacher," Kieran said. "What is it?" "There's a baby," the preacher said, lowering his voice. "A newborn. The mother was passing through on the stagecoach, fell ill and died in childbirth last night. The father is unknown." Flora's hand tightened on Kieran's arm. "The poor little thing," she whispered. "Dr. Morrison is caring for the infant now, but she needs a home." The preacher looked at them meaningfully. "I've noticed how well Thomas and Mary have thrived with you. I thought perhaps—" Kieran looked at Flora, a question in his eyes. "Could we see her?" Flora asked, her heart racing. The doctor's house, was only a short walk from the church. They left Thomas and Mary with Mrs. Hollister, promising to return shortly. Dr. Morrison led them to a back room where a makeshift cradle held a tiny bundle wrapped in white linen. The baby girl was sleeping, her face peaceful, dark wisps of hair contrasting with her fair skin. "She's healthy," the doctor said. "A fighter. She'll need that quality out here." Flora reached out tentatively, touching the infant's cheek with one finger. The baby stirred, her tiny hand emerging from the blanket to grasp Flora's finger with surprising strength. "What will happen to her?" Kieran asked. The doctor sighed. "Without family, her options are limited. The orphanage in Tucson, perhaps, though that's a difficult journey for one so young." Flora looked up at Kieran, tears in her eyes. "We can't let that happen," he nodded, understanding immediately. "No, we can't." That evening they sat Thomas and Mary down at the kitchen table. "We have something important to ask you," Kieran began. "Are we in trouble?" Thomas asked immediately. Flora laughed. "No, not at all. We wanted to know how you would feel about having a baby sister." Mary's eyes widened. "A real baby? Where is she?" "She's at the doctor's house right now," Kieran explained. "Her mother died and she doesn't have anyone to take care of her. We thought maybe she could be part of our family, but only if you both agree." Thomas frowned thoughtfully. "Babies cry a lot." "They do," Flora acknowledged, "and they need a lot of attention. It won't be easy." "But we would be helping her," Mary said, her young face serious. "Like you helped us." Thomas nodded slowly. "I could teach her things when she gets bigger, like you teach me, Pa." It was the first time he had called Kieran Pa, and the significance wasn't lost on any of them. Kieran's eyes glistened as he ruffled the boy's hair. "You would be an excellent big brother," he said huskily. "Both of you would be wonderful siblings for her." "Then it's settled," Flora said, her heart full. "Tomorrow we'll bring your baby sister home." They named the baby Hope, a testament to what she represented for their unconventional family. Her arrival necessitated some adjustments. The cabin seemed suddenly smaller. Sleep became a precious commodity, and their days revolved around feedings and diaper changes. But there were profound joys too. The first time Hope smiled, the whole family gathered around her cradle in wonder. Thomas proved to be a surprisingly gentle big brother, proudly holding the baby under Flora's watchful eye. Mary appointed herself Hope's official entertainer, singing the songs she'd learned from Flora and creating elaborate stories featuring her doll and new sister as the main characters. As Hope grew from a newborn to an infant who could sit up and babble, the bond between all of them strengthened. They were no longer individuals united by circumstance, but truly a family different from what Flora had once imagined for herself, but more beautiful than she could have dreamed. One evening in early fall, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Hope asleep in Flora's arms and the older children playing a quiet game nearby, Kieran slipped his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Happy?" he asked, just as he had that first night after bringing Thomas and Mary home. Flora looked at the sleeping baby, at the children playing contentedly at the home they had built together. "Beyond words," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You know," Kieran said thoughtfully, "I've been talking to the owner of the Broken Arrow. Old man Jenkins is looking to retire next year. He's offering me the chance to buy in as a partner, with the option to take over completely when he moves back east." Flora turned to him in surprise. "Kieran, that's wonderful. But how would we afford it?" he smiled. "I've been saving. And Jenkins is willing to work out terms. It would mean more responsibility but also more security for our family." "Our family," Flora repeated, savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." "There's something else," Kieran continued. "If we become partners at the ranch, we'd move into the main house. It's bigger room for the children to have their own spaces, maybe even room for more someday." Flora raised an eyebrow. "More children? Are you trying to start an orphanage, Mr. Ellison?" He laughed, kissing her forehead. "Not an orphanage. Just a home where children who need love can find it." She looked out at the darkening landscape, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, the grief, the loneliness, the belief that her inability to bear children made her somehow less worthy of love. "You know," she said softly, "when I told you I couldn't have children and you said I would birth your hope another way, I didn't truly understand what you meant." "And now," Kieran prompted gently. Flora gazed down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Now I understand perfectly. Hope isn't just her name, it's what we've created together. Hope for these children, for ourselves, for the future." Kieran's arm tightened around her. "That's exactly what I meant, and I've never been so happy to be right." As the stars began to appear in the vast desert sky, Flora thought about the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. Had someone told her 2 years ago that she would find such fulfillment, such joy, she wouldn't have believed them. Yet here she was, surrounded by love, with a family built not from blood, but from choice. In the years that followed, the Ellison family continued to grow. Kieran became full owner of the Broken Arrow Ranch when Jenkins retired, and they moved into the spacious main house with its wraparound porch and many bedrooms. Thomas, showing a natural aptitude for ranching, became Kieran's right hand as he grew into a thoughtful, responsible young man. Mary developed her mother's talent for storytelling, filling journals with tales that the younger children begged to hear at bedtime. Hope, no longer a baby but a spirited young girl with her father's blue eyes, was joined by 2 more siblings, a brother and sister, orphaned by a fire in a neighboring town. Flora, once convinced that her worth was diminished by her inability to bear children, found herself the heart of a thriving, loving family. She established a small school on the ranch for their children and others from isolated homesteads, teaching reading and writing alongside practical skills. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, Kieran surprised Flora with a party attended by nearly everyone in Redemption Creek. Their children, now ranging from adults to teenagers, had secretly helped plan the celebration, decorating the ranch house with wildflowers and lanterns. As twilight fell, Kieran led Flora away from the festivities to the ridge where he had proposed 2 decades earlier. The view was the same rugged beauty stretching to the horizon, but they were different, shaped by years of joy and occasional sorrow, of hard work and abundant love. "Do you ever regret it?" Flora asked suddenly. "Marrying a woman who couldn't give you children of your own blood?" Kieran turned to her, surprise evident in his still handsome face. "After all these years, you can ask that?" She shrugged, suddenly embarrassed. "Sometimes old doubts resurface, even when we know better." He took her hands in his, just as he had 20 years before. "Flora Ellison, you have given me 5 remarkable children who are my own in every way that matters. You've given me a home filled with laughter and learning. You've given me a life richer than any I could have imagined." He brushed a strand of silver-threaded auburn hair from her face. "You birthed hope in a world that can be dark and cruel. What greater gift could any man ask for?" As they stood together on the ridge, the sounds of celebration floating up from the ranch house below, their children's voices, music, laughter, Flora knew with absolute certainty that she had indeed found the perfect way to birth hope, not from her body, but from her heart. And it had made all the difference.